Good morning, everybody. Okay, let's jump straight in. So here we go. We're going to be talking about today the mystery of mourning, the complex topic of mourning in halacha. So we're picking up from after Kvura, and there onwards the process of mourning itself. We have this process in Judaism called Shiva, and very aptly it is translated as 7. So the first question just is why is Shiva 7? Should be a pretty obvious question. Why is Shiva 7 days? Right? So there are actually a number of reasons for this. Interestingly enough, the Gemara in Shabbos stuff Kuf Nun Beis Amud Aleph tells us a very fascinating thing, is that the soul of a person mourns for itself for 7 days. There's a process of the soul itself in a state of mourning, and that takes a 7-day period. That's what the pasuk says. But nafshai alav te'ebal, and the soul will mourn for itself, is in a certain sense, which is really fascinating. I always wonder if that is the reason why we have the practice to say Hamakom Menachem Eschem in plural, even if one person is sitting, and perhaps maybe it's referring not just to the mourner, but to the soul which is present, which is also in a state of mourning. The Gemara in the Talmud Yerushalmi in Ksubas, the very beginning, actually tells us that this practice dates back all the time to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who instituted this practice called 7, the 7-day mourning process. Interestingly enough, the Gemara then goes on in the Yerushalmi, in Yemoed Katan, Gimel Hey, to go on to explain that there are a number of other places where we see this was the practice even before Moshe Rabbeinu. For an example, the Talmud says that when it says Vayas La'aviv Evel Shivas Yamim, right? We know by Yosef and his father there was a 7-day process of mourning. The Gemara goes on to quote the name of Rabbi Yaakov Ba'acha, the name of Rabbi Zaira, that when Aaron lost his sons, it says Pesach Oil Moed Teshush Yomam Valala Shivas Yamim Ushmartim Mishkan Hashem. They were to wait by the tent of meeting, by the Oil Moed, for 7 days. That was his time of mourning. The Talmud goes even further, and says, How do you know that God himself mourned for 7 days on his world? And the Gemara goes on to describe in Parashas Noach, that it was at 7 days that the world was destroyed. God was mourning for the world before he destroyed his own world. That was why there was 7 days. And the Gemara says perhaps even it was the 7 days of the mourning for Metushelach, the oldest lived human being. And he passed away. God waited 7 days and then the flood came. So there's multiple different historical reasons, or not reasons, but we'll call models for the notion of Shiva. And we see this throughout. This is what the Talmud Yerushalmi tells us. Now, just in terms of the Shiva house itself, we know that there's a few things that are set up in the Beis Avel which are unique. One is we light a candle. Why do we light a candle in the Beis Avel? Today we're fortunate to have 7-day candles, these very, very long, tall candles. In the old days, they just light a candle. When it went out, they would light another candle for this, that there'd be a candle lit. Why is that? So the Ma'avor Yabok explains that it gives a nechama, a sense of comfort to the neshama of the niftar that is present in the Beis Avel, which is why it is lit. And it's let to go till afterwards as well. There's another interesting thing about the way that a Beis Avel is set up, and people are familiar with this, is that the mirrors are covered. Why are the mirrors covered in a Beis Avel? So the most basic reason is that a person who is in the state of mourning is not doing self-care. They're not looking after themselves. And so the mirror is a place where you look as you sort of put yourself into place. And this is not the time for self-care. A person's not looking after themselves whatsoever during this period of time. What was that?
Men.
In general, historically speaking, men generally weren't supposed to look in the mirror. We're living in a very vain generation where that's not necessarily the case anymore. But it's also seen to be a source, a vehicle of self-purification, which connects between spouses. And being as the time of Shiva is a time of separation, it's also seen as a stepping back from that. And similarly, it's also because davening is done in the Beis Avel, So the mirrors are covered because you're not supposed to be davening when there's mirrors that you're looking. It looks like you're praying to yourself. Another part of this is that death is seen as sort of the falling of the human form. In a certain sense, it takes us back to the primordial chet, where human beings first sinned and brought death into the world. And as a function of that, there's a certain sense of a failure of the human being. And so we don't look at the human form, so to speak. We refrain from reflecting upon the human form as we see sort of the failure of life, the ultimate end which we are experiencing as well in terms of setting this up. Now, during the Shiva itself, why is it that an Avel does not wear tefillin during the first day of Avelis? Most people don't think about this, because what will happen is there'll be, for a man, there'll be an aninus in the morning. If there's a funeral, and then they just sort out why didn't wear tefillin. But let's say a man wakes up really super late, and he doesn't daven. What should he do? Should wear tefillin at mincha. But you've never seen an Avel wear tefillin at mincha. And the reason is because halachically speaking, an Avel is not allowed to wear tefillin the first day of Avelis. Right? That's meaning even when they're beyond the state of aninus. Why is that? And the reason is we actually learn this from Yechezkel. Yechezkel is a terrible situation. Yechezkel, as a prophet, lived and endured many of the prophecies that he told other people. So Hashem made him demonstrate multiple prophecies which were quite remarkable. As an example, there's the whole thing about Ezekiel's bread, right, where he lies on his side for a number of days, and he lies on his other side, and then he puts together this bread, and he has a pan, and he puts it to the fire. There's all kinds of crazy things, but the most crazy thing that happens is that God takes away his wife, right? So his wife dies, and he is told how to act after her death in a way which is reflective of what Klal Yisrael will experience. And he tells Yechezkel, you may not mourn, you may not experience mourning, like there won't be time for the nation of Israel to mourn for its dead when the destruction comes. Terrifying, right? So his wife and his personal tragedy becomes the symbol of the national tragedy. And so there's a number of things that he's told not to do, which are therefore reflective of what we usually do. One of the things is that he's told, Pe'ercha chavush alecha. You're meant to wear your splendor, which means your tefillin. And we understand from there that an Avel is not allowed to wear their splendor, which is their tefillin, which is a pe'er, a jewel, on the most intense time of Avelos, which is the first day. Just to understand the logic of that as well.
Like Tisha B'Av Shachris, we also.
Yes, and Tisha B'Av Shachris, there's no tefillin in the morning. Why do people sit low during Shiva? So this is originally actually what was known as in the Gemara time as what's called Kfias Hamita. Kfias Hamita means the overturning of the bed. They would have these beds and they would sit on them. They would turn over the bed as well. And again, the Gemara understands this is a reflection of the overturning of the Tzelem Elokim. The godly image has been, so to speak, brought low. Right? A human being is no longer, and we turn over the bed, so we're no longer, so to speak, reflecting on the human image, which is why people generally speak sit very low. In the old days, it used to be on the ground, literally, and today we've invented all kinds of chairs that make it a lot easier. But it's meant to be that it's low as a reflection of this. Why is that Avelim do not wear leather shoes? So again, Yechezkel was told to wear shoes, right? So when he was mourning or not mourning for his wife, he was told to wear leather shoes. Well, this is a similar thing to a Tisha B'Av as well. In general, it comes from the department of self-care as well, which means that in the process of Avelos, the person is not looking after self, they're focusing outwards on their loved one, which is why also there's no anointing, right? There's no washing, there's no jewelry, it's a time of sort of less focus on oneself as well. Interestingly enough, the anointing and the washing is actually also learned from another Tanakh story. So this is what's called the Isha Hatakoit. What's that referring to? David HaMelech had a lot of trouble in his family, and many of the times that he had trouble, he was reprimanded by prophets through a metaphor. So one of David and Bathsheba is a very famous example of that. There's another example, and that is when he hasn't come to terms with his son Avshalom. Avshalom murders his other son. But the other son, Amnon, raped his daughter. It's a terrible story. The whole thing is terrible from beginning to end. So Amnon seduces and rapes Tamar, and before David HaMelech has anything to do with it, Tamar's brother, Avshalom, kills Amnon because he doesn't feel like his father is taking care of it. David HaMelech, in a certain sense, emotionally cuts off from Avshalom, and Avshalom runs to refuge. Yoav bridges, try to bring his son Avshalom back, but David HaMelech will not speak to him. He won't countenance his son, understandably. But then what Yoav does is he sends this woman dressed up, a woman from Tekoa, and he makes her dressed up like she is in a state of mourning. And she presents the following case, and she says, my one son, God forbid, murdered my other son. And now the family say, I need to prosecute and press charges to execute my remaining son. And she says, but if I execute my son, then I won't have a son, right? And I won't have any children left. I'll be left bereft. And so David HaMelech says, no, you shouldn't do that. You should, you need to look after your son. And she says, it's you. And that was what she was talking about, how, right, he is now prosecuting Avshalom, but Avshalom is his remaining son. It's a terrible thing. In that description of how she is in a state of mourning, one of the things is that he says, Al tosuchi shemen, when Yoav is prepping her and to stage as being his mother in mourning, he says, don't adorn yourself, don't wash yourself, don't anoint yourself. And so to speak, we see a sort of this this earlier expression of Avelis, which is still in practice today as well. And why is that Avelim do not learn Torah? So we know that the pasuk tells us in Tehillim, Pekudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamchei Leiv. Learning Torah is something which makes the person happy. They tell a story about Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, that after Tisha B'Av, they couldn't find him. All the boys, they looked to the base medrash. He wasn't there. He wasn't in the cafeteria to go to eat. In Israel, they called it Cheder Rachel. It's just funny. I always wondered who was Rachel, right? But no, it's the Cheder Rachel. So they couldn't find him, and they found him in his office, and there he was. He was learning Torah, and they said to him, "Does the Rosh Hashanah want to have something to eat?" And he says, I haven't learned Torah the whole day. See, there was something very deeply lacking in his thing. There's a very special gentleman in our shul who was sick a few years ago. I went to visit him, and because he was attacked by a dog, and he had to have some medication, and the medication he had just made his brain fuzzy. He couldn't think, and he was crying because he couldn't learn. He was crying because he couldn't learn Torah. Like that was because of the medication that he was. That's what we're talking about. It's Mesamchei Leiv. If you're able to appreciate the finesse, the beauty of the learning. Why is an Avel not meant to work? So an Avel is not meant to work for employees. It's usually simpler than business owners. For an employee, you tell there's bereavement time today, and there's days that a person can take. But for a lot of people, if one's a business owner, it's more complicated. One should really sell one's business. There's a document in Aninus to sell one's business. Okay, there's the mess. So the Talmud Menagim explains that, interesting enough, that the Avelos is compared in the Gemara to the Chag, right, to the festival. HaKadosh Baruch Hu ironically says, I will turn your festivals, Chageichem, to Avelos, to mourning. And the Gemara learns that, in a certain sense, these very opposite experiences have shared called characteristics. Like there's no work on a Chag, there's no work on the Avelos. They are both obviously 7-day periods, which also explains why it is that where are the laws of Avelos found in the Gemara? In a book called the Tractate of Moed Katan, which refers to Chol HaMoed, which refers to the festival itself, fascinatingly enough. So it shares that property with the festival. Actually, there was a fellow in our shul whose mother passed away in the Daf Yomi cycle at Daf Tezayin in Moed Katan, which is where the halachas of so he was able to continue his Daf cycle, learning the halachas of Avelos through his shiva. He was very happy in that sense, obviously not in any other sense, but he was happy that he could continue his learning of Torah because it pertained to the halachas of mourning, which was in Moed Katan itself. Why is the Moel and Avel not meant to travel alone during the Shiva? So the Gemara in Brachas tells us that there are three people that are tzrichim shimur, that require protection. And the Gemara adds in the fourth one, and the fourth is an Avel. And the reason for this is as the Rambam describes, quoting the Gemara, is that when a person passes away, those who are closest are in a state of din, or in a state of judgment. And therefore, they need protection. They should be very, very careful about the way they conduct themselves and where they go during that period of time. The way the Rambam describes it is he says, Yidag kol ha'chabura. Everybody in the immediate periphery should be very concerned. And the way he describes it is, he says, a person should imagine that a sword is upon the nape of their neck throughout the course of Shiva. And then throughout the course of Shloshim, he says that a person walks through the marketplace with a sword following them wherever they are. It's as if, that's why it's a very, very scary description, in a certain sense, talking about the vulnerability of the human condition. And we don't have any guarantees. We don't have any guarantees about life. And the people who feel it's the most are the people who have been brushed so close. And that's why, even if an Avel is going backwards and forwards, they should really be accompanied by somebody else.
What's the other three?
What is that? It's a chasm yom chupasa, which is why there's a shomer on the chasm. I don't remember the other two. I don't remember the other two.
She says
Bride,
bride.
No, bride and groom are the same. Yeah, I don't remember the other two for a moment. Yeah, it's the Gemara Brachos Dav Nun something. Okay, the appropriate behavior. Okay, from the community standpoint. So the first thing to notice is that the first meal, as a person enters Shiva, is provided by the community. It shouldn't be from one's own pantry. It's called the Sudas Havra. The verb is lahavros, to give this meal to the Avel. And so much so that an Avel is not really supposed to eat of their own food before they have started eating the food of the community. Why is this the case? So the first reason is to ensure that they are cared for in a time of grief. A lot of times when a person's in a state of traumatic grief, they cannot think about self-care and looking after themselves, and so the community is forced, the halacha regulates the community to step in. And now it's always complicated when halacha steps in to regulate something. In a certain sense, sometimes you lose the meaning of it, right? Because we're doing this because the Torah told us to, the halacha told us to, but it's always a balance. It doesn't mean it's only the first meal. In a certain sense, the way I view it is halacha is regulating the way to start this, so you get the sense of how to continue this. Meaning, but the halacha is not going to regulate the breakfast, the lunches, and the supper, but it's meant to be that's what the community is meant to do, so it regulates the first one, so the rest of the community steps in and understands the importance of this. And this, by the way, to today, even in the reform world, where very little is left of Avelus altogether, right? This is the one thing that does remain, is food, right? Food is a very Jewish expression of giving and support to the person. In addition, there's another reason which is really a terrifying reason, which is the Gesher HaChaim. Rabbi Yechiel Michael Tukachansky in his book on Avelus writes Gesher HaChaim, which means the bridge of life. So he describes the transition between worlds, and so he observes that there's a Kabbalistic concept what's called Nama de Kisufa, which means bread of embarrassment, of shame. What does that mean? That means it refers to a person who lives a life in this world and just doesn't live to their calling. They don't maximize, they don't improve, they don't grow, they coast along based on, and it's possible, many people coast along life, right, without having done anything to warrant their existence. It says when those people get to the other end, those people will receive great divine light, but they will not have deserved that light. They will not deserve it because they didn't work to earn it. And there's a terrible, unending shame they will experience in the world to come because they never worked to receive the light that they will receive on the other end. That's called Nama de Kisufa, the bread of shame. Right? And so our work in this life is to continue to pedal, to strive, to go against friction, to go upstream, as we go through this, to earn what it will be at the other end. Because in this world we work, in that world we receive. But we don't work in that world, and therefore we will be receiving that which we don't earn in the world to come. Which is why,
socialism.
so therefore, interestingly enough, That's why the first meal is a meal which you don't own. And the Rav Yechanan Tukachinsky says it's a reminder to everybody who's left behind, you're still here because you have work to do. Right? You don't want to receive handouts. Nobody wants to receive gifts. And so therefore, in a sense, this is the way it's described. I know a person who's on welfare. And I was saying, let's get a job, let's figure this out. And he said to me, I cannot. I'm trapped eternally in welfare because I won't be able to find a job that'll give me enough that'll allow me to be able to have my own health insurance and to be able to work because I need to start off part-time because of my condition. And I will never be, I'm trapped in a state of eternal welfare. It's a terrible, you don't feel good with yourself because somebody's giving you a handout. That's the Namadik Kesufa. The first meal is a reminder that we're here to work in this world as well. Now, in Shiva, why is it that one should not speak to until spoken to?
Why do we do all the meals?
So that was what I mentioned beforehand, is that it's regulated in a way to, if the halacha was that every meal was expected, then in a certain sense, I would say that it would be done because one was told to, it's halacha. I think there's a balance between setting the goal and then people realizing themselves, which is what happens. And that's exactly what happens, right? But okay. Now, why is it that in a Shiva you're not supposed to speak until you're spoken to? Now, for some people, that might be news. Some people come in and they have everything to say. But technically speaking, you're not supposed to speak until you're acknowledged and spoken to by an Avel. I've been to Shiva houses where you walk in and it's absolutely silent. And the Avel's not up to speaking. And you sit there in silence and then you wait. And you wish them welcome and you leave. And that's the appropriate way because they're not in a space to speak. And the reason for that is because the way it's described is Avel ein lo peh, is that an Avel doesn't have a mouth. What does that mean? Is they don't always feel like they want to speak. They're not here to entertain you, right? And therefore, it's very important to be sensitive to that. Sometimes it will happen that a person will sit down and the Avel will acknowledge a person. Now, that doesn't give license to talk about the traffic, the weather, the recent sports game, or one's own tragedy. Like those are not. That's no, a lot of times I ask Avelim, what was helpful and what was not helpful? Like, what were the things that helped you, and what were the things that didn't help you? And it's the list of what doesn't help is a very long list, right? As to what's not helpful. But unfortunately, for anybody who's had to go through the experience, have a renewed sensitivity about what this means. And I think it's really important to understand that if you have a story, if you own a part of life with the person who passed away, your telling that is very meaningful, right? So if you were a neighbor, a business partner, a friend, a travel partner with a person who passed away, you have a unique angle to share. Share that. The family so wants to hear that angle because that's another angle of life. But in addition, if you weren't, it's important to be asking questions which relate to character and how they lived, not how they died. This is the biggest travesty I see in Shiva houses, is people asking how they died. This is not a macabre play. We're not trying to find out what was blow after blow and then the rushing to the hospitals and the oxygen. No. That was let's ask what they lived for. What were the values that woke them up in the morning? What were things that gave them their sparkle in their eye? What made them who they were, rather than going through like the death process again and again and again. It's amazing how insensitive and how completely emotionally dormant people are when it comes to this. I sit in showers, I listen to these people going, and it's completely inappropriate. While I'm on my soapbox, I will also say that there's a practice which I see in a base of that I understand where it comes from. That people stand up to wish their makam in there, or they'll kneel in front of the Avel, and they'll make their own 10-minute speech. There are 50 other people behind them, right? But they go on to make their own personal little rendition. That's not Nichum Avelim. You say your thing when it's appropriate, and you leave, because there are other people as well. The Avel is also balancing, trying to reach all the people in the room, and it's completely inappropriate. Why should everybody be sitting there watching your back while you are making your personal rendition. It's not about you. It's about the person who's sitting over, is sitting Shiva. So just understand this. It's just like there's sensitivities which I'm dumbfounded when I watch people in the way that they observe Shiva. It's most important is to ask Avelim what is helpful for you. Right? What was good for you? What was helpful? What was comforting? And to replicate that rather than just speaking to ourselves. I'm sorry to have to say this, but just like it's shocking to me how what I hear going on in Batei Avel so many times. Another thing is people coming to visit should not be having their own conversation. Right? That's it's just. If you're coming to the Avel and you're in the second row and you're talking about your kid's graduation, no, that's not the time. You wait and you walk outside, and there's a great world out there to talk about that. But here is not the time to catch up with somebody you haven't seen. You happen to be sitting in the same row. As well, just these are such obvious things, but it's amazing. Okay, now why is it that we should not take food out of the base Avel? You know that there's a practice you're not supposed to take the food out of the base Avel. Interestingly enough, this is actually discussed. Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Eliyah Rabbah, describes this, and that is because there's seen as a ruach ra in this. It's not now. Technically speaking, if you go back to the original custom, it was generally food that was there at the time of death, right? So if you go technically back, and it might be because of concern of perhaps whether it's physical or spiritual contamination. That was so it's not as applicable. But and leftover food is fine. If it's going to go to Bal Tashchis because it's just too much, you can give it away and people can do this. But generally speaking, that's where it originated from as well, which is perhaps why it's less of a concern.
So it is okay to give it away to...
Absolutely. If you're at the end of the Shiva, when there's 13 trays of sushi...
Every night.
Yeah. So it's and people mean so well, but
right.
what are you going to do with the food? Right? You're allowed to give it away, and certainly at the end of Shiva, and if it's going to go to Bal Tashchis,
Well, that's a good question.
for sure.
You have to wash your hands?
Was that?
You
No.
wash your hands?
No, though that's only when one's in the actual presence of the niftar, or in the Beis HaKvaros. Now, tefillah in the Beis Avel. Why do people make a minyan in the Beis Avel? So the Shibbolei Halakha says that the soul is mourning for the mourners as well. Right? So the soul is grieving for those left behind, and tefillah brings a degree of comfort. So in a place where there's a chiyuv to say the kaddish, then one makes a minyan in that house that brings a lot of nechama. Why is that we do not say Birkas Kohanim in the Beis Avel? So there's like a few minor changes to davening. One of them is that in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, there's no Birkas Kohanim. In Chutz Aretz, it's Elokeinu v'Elokei Avosseinu. In Israel, it's the real Birkas Kohanim. Why is that not there? So one of the restrictions on Avelos is what's called She'elas Shalom. You're not supposed to bless or ask the Avel for peace. You're not, which in colloquial terms could mean, how are you doing? You're not allowed to ask the Avel how they're doing, right? Because they're not in a place of peace, and therefore you're asking them to open up a place which is very painful for them. That's not the right question. And so, that's asr, it's called She'elas Shalom. And in the Gemara, She'elas Shalom isn't just how are you, but it's blessing them with peace. So imagine that you're in the Beis Avel and they're doing Yoseim Lecha Shalom, which is the end of the Birkas Kohanim where he says Amen. That's referring to the peace which the people, the Avelim, are not in that state. They can't. It's inappropriate to answer that question or to say Amen to that in the Beis Avel. Why is there no Tachanun in the Beis Avel? Tachanun is that very intense supplication right off the Shemona Esrei where people put their heads down for. So the reason is because that prayer is such an intense supplication. It's seen as said at a time of great sorrow, great pain, which is about din, which evokes the judgment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's saying we're so desperate. We try to step away from anything to do with din in the Beis Avel, justice, because it is a time of justice for the soul. So we try to sort of tread very lightly, which is why we also leave out Lanatzach Mizmor David, which is Mizmor Chof at the end of davening as well. Those are pulled for the davening, yeah.
I actually have read that She'elas Shalom applies to the year. That is
It
the
does.
original origin.
It does.
And that actually when a child is born and given that name, that the
That gives the
status
ruch
of the
of,
Avos
yes.
changes and it takes that away.
It does. So, by the way, just to you understand, this is also the reason. I don't want to get into touch depth, but it's the same reason as also not giving gifts to an Avel throughout the year. and also not inviting them to meals as well, just like large gatherings. Those are all extensions of She'elas Shalom, which is, but most people are not aware of this. It's just very hard for us to operate in society because we are a verbose society where we just talk all the time. But in the days where people used to think a little bit about before they said, then we were more sensitive to these types of things. Also, I think the She'elas Shalom is also the way people would greet a person is Shalom Aleichem is much more meaningful than how's it going, right? So also it was a blessing as much as it was a request. As also it's more complicated, yes.
So the whole year, one is not allowed to invite another Friday night Shabbat for meals?
Small meals that one would usually have is
No,
fine.
Friday night Shabbat.
Small meals on a Shabbos are fine as the one would usually have
What
it.
does that mean, a small meal?
One or two people,
Oh, a small group.
as opposed to anniversary,
12.
birthday, offer of meals. Those things are not allowed. Why is it there's no Hallel in the base of El? So
Uvalatzion is the same reason?
yes, the Uvalatzion we skipped the first thing because right. So that is seen as the eternal covenant, and there's a certain feeling of lacking of that covenant. This point at which is removed, that pasuk in Uvalatzion. This is one of those little shifts in the davening. Why is there no Halal base of El? So the Taz is already on the Shulchan Aruch says near it down. In Shin Ayin Zayin says that Lo Yamesim Yahalulu Ka, right? The Mesim do not have the capacity to praise God in the way that we do when we're alive here, ironically in this complex world. And if we were to do it in the base of it would be in the fraction of Lo'eg Lorosh, which is we're making fun, so to speak, of the Niftar who can't praise God in the same way, so we step back from Hallel. Interesting enough, there's different practices in the different Batei Avel. The practice in Arshel is the Avel steps out for Hallel, everybody else says it, but the Avel himself won't say it. But and some have the practice not to say it at all in a base Avel that reflects this. Why is it that in the davening there are different practices as to the extra Kaddish? Now, people treat this like the most important part of religion. This is not the most important part of religion. This is an ancillary detail, but it is important to realize. We add on an extra mizmor in a base avel. We add in mizmor mem tes. It is a very self-reflective, we'll call it ephemeral mizmor in Tehillim number 49. At the speed that most people say it, and that I've seen, clearly does not reflect the ability to reflect of what is meant to be about. But it's meant to be a reflection on life. It's meant to be that we don't take anything with us. And what are we doing here? That's what the Mizmor is about. It's added in the base of as a self-reflection piece. It happens to be when you add in an extra Mizmor Tehillim, then there's the opportunity to say Kaddish, right? So as an example, in a regular Shachris, we say Aleinu, and then we say Kaddish. We say the Mizmor Shir Shel Yom HaShabbos, and we add Kaddish because it's a new Mizmor Tehillim. Aleinu is not Tehillim. Aleinu is davening. The capital, the Mizmor of the day is Tehillim. So you say another Kaddish. So in this case, technically speaking, you should say another Kaddish. So that's what it's like at night. At night, you do Aleinu, and then we add in the Mizmor Tehillim, and we say another Kaddish because it's a new form. It's a different form. It's Tehillim. What about during the day? So during the day, there's two opinions as to what you should do. And the Matei Ephraim already describes two opinions. One is that we would say another Tehillim, another Kaddish after it. So we do the regular davening, Aleinu Kaddish, Shir Shel Yom Kaddish, and then Mizmor, Korach Mizmor, and then Kaddish. And there are those who say, no, you're going from Tehillim to Tehillim in the morning, don't add an extra one, group them together, and then say one Kaddish. You shouldn't be marbe Kaddish. You shouldn't just add Kaddishim that frequently. And as a function of that, like we do, as an example, in other places on Rosh Chodesh, what do? We have Shir Shel Yom and Baruch Nafshi. During Elul, we have Shir Shel Yom and the David. What do? We put them together. We say one Kaddish afterwards. Once those who practice the former of those opinions, which is you add an extra Kaddish, then people said, it's being added in the base Avel, so the Avel should say it. So it became the sense that, it's his Kaddish. Then people get very concerned. You're taking away his Kaddish. It's like, no, nobody's taking away anything. It's just, the question is, are we doing the same thing we do on a regular Rosh Chodesh in the base Avel as well? And so you'll see sometimes different practices that surround this as well. I asked when I was speaking, when I was clarifying, I spoke to Rav Hershel Shechter about this, and he said the correct opinion is not to be Ma'ariv Kadishin, which is Rabbi Talabam and Marshal, which is why the practice of Marshal is to join together the Tehillim in the morning. In the night, it's not Tehillim, because Aleinu and the Mizmor and Memtes are not Tehillim, so then there's two separate Kadishes. In the morning, you would not do this. Sorry.
Thank you. Is it appropriate after you have the minyan to have like bagels and muffins and things for the guys?
For
to
sure,
go
yeah.
So that's appropriate?
Yeah.
For you to set that up and for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Sephardim have a whole.
Oh yeah,
every day
Sephardim
they have
go to
a
town.
huge- And
Yeah.
they think it's a schus for the
Absolutely.
Shabbat.
Let's say many more brachas for the niftar. It's a beautiful thing. Absolutely. It's a beautiful thing, and Ashkenazim do it as well, but you should see this in a Sephardic Shiva. I mean, oh my goodness. They've got like trays of fruit that are going around with different brachas. It's amazing. But yeah, absolutely. Let's get as many people to. But the point is saying brachas. So just like I always say, if you put out the food, just put up a sign to remind people, because a bracha is so easy to forget when it comes to this. Okay, now let's talk about this for a moment. The end of Shiva. Shiva always ends in the morning. Alan, yeah.
One thing about laning.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing about having laning.
Oh yeah.
What's the?
So this is actually more of a Torah question, a Sefer Torah question, than it is an Avel question. And that is like this: is when are you allowed to bring a Torah to another person, right? So the truth is, the Shulchan Aruch says you don't just bring Torahs to people, right? You go to Torahs, you don't bring Torahs to people. It's disrespectful to think that the Torah dances around people, right? So the Shulchan Aruch says it would be a right to bring a Torah to a person if they're going to learn from it 3 times. Because that in a certain sense means that they're actually using it. It's not just, I'm going on a Shabbos with my family and I'm going to take... No. It has to be that there's a real usage, a real kfios. So that's why in the old practices it used to be that they would bring it to a base of, well, if they could get it on a Monday, a Thursday, and a Shabbos afternoon. That's why they would do it, to create those 3, to generally speaking today, we're a little more makil on this. That seems to be the practice about a base level. We'll bring a Torah, even though there's only 2 lanings. We won't make a special minyan for this as well. The one thing which is a hakpada is you're not supposed to bring a Sefer Torah that's wrapped in a talis. It's meant to have its own aron, right? So it's not appropriate to bring a Torah just put and left on the table and things like that. That is considered inappropriate. It needs to have its own makom yochad, which is why Ashul has 2 or 3 aronos which go around and that's seen as a respect for the Sefer Torah itself. Okay. Why does the Shiva end in the morning? Shiva ends in the morning because we know that we paskin, that's what's called mitzvah sayom kakolai. Actually, this works on both sides of the Avelos. Usually, let's say funerals in the afternoon, the Avelim get home, they sit for an hour, 2 hours, and that's day 1, right? So it's a piece of the day. The same thing at the end, which means that Avelos really is only 5 days with a Shabbos in the middle and 2 pieces on either end. That's really what it is, unless it took place after dark, right? But in a certain sense, we try to minimize the amount of Avelos, and therefore it's set up in such a way that it's just the morning, the morning of Shiva itself. Why is it that there's a minhag to walk around the block? The minhag is not to walk around the block. The minhag is to walk outside. So in Lawrence, that could be a really big block, So it's not about the block; it's about the outside. So there's a few reasons for this. One reason is that up till now the Avelim have been focused inwards. They've been cloistered, they've been protected from the world out at large, but now they need to move out. There's an appropriate time to move back into the world. That being the case, therefore there's a movement outwards, a demonstration of return to the public sphere. There's another reason, and that's the Sefer Tamim Menhagim quotes a very beautiful idea, where he says that when a person passes away, the neshama oscillates between movement towards the next stage, and then is also tethered to places it inhabits, which is a chaotic moment, a time of a lot of trauma. And that's the period of Shiva. At the end of the Shiva process is when the neshama is released. When the neshama is no longer bound to the here and now, the places that it was. And as, in a certain sense, walking out the house is an acknowledgement of levaya, of walking outwards, of release, the calmness of it being in a better place as well. Let's move a little bit into the restrictions of the Yom Avelos. Why is Avelos shorter for spouses, siblings, and children? Gula Aleinu. So the truth is, it's not shorter. The truth is that Avelos is 30 days. Avelos is 7 days and then 30 days. That's the default, and that's for everybody. The exception to that rule is children. Children mourning for parents have an extended responsibility as a function of their kibbud ava'im. Everybody else doesn't have kibbud ava'im as a function. It's very painful because people think, why do not, the ritual in a certain sense is comforting to be able to have the responsibilities, restrictions, and as well. The Zohar, in fact, says that the body and the soul are judged together for the entire process of the 30 days, which is why it's specifically 30 days, which is the default Avelis. Now, why is it that the Year of Avelis is structured as it is? In a certain sense, it's a step-down program, right? As opposed to the 3 weeks, which is the opposite. It's climatic. The 3 weeks is, it starts off minimal restrictions, increased restrictions, Av, and then the Shavua Shechalba, and then Tisha B'Av itself, right? It's increasing. The process of Avelis is exactly the opposite. It's decreasing. It's like reverse 3 weeks. Why is that? So there's the reason that I would suggest is that Chazal, based on these many people in Tanakh who experienced loss and the way they processed it and the way they acted through this processing, the Chazal formulated a way to do this to answer the following question. They said, have we done enough? Are we doing enough? If we didn't have, let's say there was no Avelos, God forbid, and we had to process this ourselves. Let's say we're not in the realm of Judaism, God forbid, and so you just had to formulate your own way of dealing with this. So one day you get really super busy and then feel terribly guilty. You didn't deal with spend enough time thinking about the departed. The next day you wouldn't get out of bed, just paralyzed from pain, and then in a certain sense you would not get anything done, and you'd just oscillate between doing and not doing, and it would be very difficult to regulate what is appropriate, what is enough. So Chazal said, well, for the first 7 days while the neshama is a process of din, you're going to stop everything in your life and you're going to focus on them. Then after 7 days, you're going to go back to life, and you have to go back to life. But you're going to have many restrictions that are going to remind you that this is not regular life. And for children, after that, for another 11 months, there's going to be minimal vestigial restrictions. In a certain sense, it's a step-down program because it accompanies us and allows us not to have to make the decisions about what's appropriate. So therefore, if I say, did I do enough? The answer is yes. This is the way it was. 1 week of the year is 1/52nd of a year, which is 2% of your year. It's a significant amount of time that you stopped everything. Right? The Shloshim is a month, is a 10th of the year, essentially. A 12th of the year, that life is out of sync. That is enough. That's the appropriate way. You have to move forward while looking backwards at the same time. And Chazal created that framework of reference, which makes it a lot easier because you don't have to make the rules. You're not in charge of making the rules. Why is that we say Kaddish? Why is Kaddish said? The earliest rendition of this is brought in the Machzor Vitri, quoting a very fascinating story about Rebbe Akiva. It describes Rebbe Akiva was with a Be'ez HaKvaros, was in a cemetery, and he saw there was this fellow that was running backwards and forwards, relentlessly carrying. He was blackened on his body, and he was carrying wood. And he asked him what was going on. He said, "Oh, I lived a terribly corrupt life, and I did all kind." He describes the decrepit, type of life that he led. And he said, when I got to the next world, I'm no longer alive. And when I got to the next world, I am forced to go and cut the firewood that is going to be used as the fuel to burn me every day because of the punishment that I need to go through. And Akiva was so taken aback by this. He said, did you leave over like a son? Like, did you leave over anybody like behind you? This man describes how he was a tax collector and used to favor the rich and take advantage of the poor. And a terrible man, right? So he deserved what he was getting, but it's a terrible thing. So he says, so he says the following. He says, do you have a son who can say Yehei Shmei Rabbah for you? So he says, he didn't have a child. He says, but I did leave a wife who was pregnant. I don't know if he was even brought up as a Jew. I really don't know. So Rebbe Akiva went along and he went and he's trying to find. Was there a woman who was left pregnant around this place, around this time? And finally he actually did find that there was such a woman, and he finds this man lived in a place called Ludkia, and he finds where this wife, he finds the child, and it's just funny because when he's trying to find this person, they said, did such and such a person live here? And they said that their response is Yishchaku atzmoso shalosa ish. Their response is, let his bones be ground up, meaning he was a really bad guy, right? So like nobody was very appreciative of him. But he finds for the wife, and so they said, let her be wiped out from the. It is terrible. This child was a son. He wasn't even circumcised, so he was like, there's nothing to talk about. So Rekiva goes and he circumcises him, and he teaches him Torah, and he brings him to a point where he's able to daven Baruch Hu and Yeshmei Rabbah, and this fellow comes to him in a dream and says, you allowed me to respite from this, right? So it's seen in a certain sense that when a son is able to say a Kaddish for a parent, there's a certain level of release. Well, why is this? So there's a few things. Number one is it helps, as this midrash seems to describe, that any punishment that a person may be facing, God forbid, in the next world, the Kaddish in a certain sense is a schus. It's an agency that somebody who after you cares enough about you to bring Kiddush Shem Shemaim into the world, that is a great thing for that person, and it will allow a certain release. Another reason is that because it's also an expression of ratifying God's judgment, meaning there's a lot of reasons why a person who's experienced loss can have a lot of reasons to not feel really so pleased with the way this world is run, right? And they could say very upsetting things because of the way they're at. And Kaddish is saying, God, you run this world. Your name is great, and you should be exalted and praised and elevated and all that business. So what in a certain sense, it's a ratifying, God, even though I really don't think this was the right course of action right now, I'm acknowledging that you run this show, which is another piece of this. In addition, it's also reflecting the fact that a human being is an irreplaceable in this world. A human being is not a piece of machinery, is not a piece of furniture, is not something which can be replicated. No human being is replaceable. And when a person goes away, when a person leaves this world, this dimension, it's an irreplaceable vacuum of holiness. Right? The holiness that person expressed is an irreversible vacuum. And so we try to bring more Kiddush Shem Shamayim into this world because we recognize so much is lacking. And we get different people to come together to answer Yeshmei Rabbah. You know how hard it is to get different people to get together? Think about this community for a second. Think about how many different professions, how many different political persuasions, how many different age groups there are. Like in a regular world, outside of Judaism, people have clubs, yes. But why would all these different people come together? Right? They have nothing to do with each other to a large extent. Some people had sent kids in school at the same time, but now you bring all those people into a room, and they all say, let God's name be great. That's a huge Kiddush Hashem, right? They won't agree on the weather, they won't agree on the traffic, they won't agree on politics, they won't agree on public policy, but they will agree on God being great. That's a tremendous Kiddush Hashem Shema, which we try to fill that void. It's an amazing thing. The more diverse a community, the more the Kiddush Hashem Shemaim for that as well. I'm going to hold the questions because I'm running out of time. So it's also okay. Why is Kaddish in Aramaic, right? Kaddish. First, just to clarify, not all Kaddish is in Aramaic. The first paragraph is. The second paragraph is not. The second paragraph is in Hebrew. But why is the first paragraph in Aramaic? So Tosfos and Brachos, Dr. Mourning tells us two reasons. One is that it was said at the end of the drasha, at the end of the public gathering of teaching of Torah, and so the Amcha, the regular proletariat was there, and they just didn't understand Hebrew. So they translated into the lingua franca of the Middle East, which was Aramaic for many, many, many centuries. So that was why it is. However, the Tosfos says it's also it's not the lowest of languages; it's also the highest of languages that the angels don't even understand. It goes up without an intermediary. Why do you want the angels not to understand it? And the reason is because it's expressing something which is not necessarily what we see. In fact, Yeshmei Rabbah Mevorach Olam Ma'al Maya is in a certain sense a paraphrasing of a translation of Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ed, which is Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ed in Hebrew is said quietly because Kavod Malchus is not very clear in this world right now. The honor of God's dominion is not right. So in a certain sense, we say it in Aramaic, right, to side the angels. We say it quietly, except on the one day, on Yom Kippur. But the point is that we're not glorifying what is the absence. Kaddish is talking about the world that ought to be, not the world that is. That's really what it is. Yeah, and to me, the words that are the most powerful are Ba'alma Divra Kirusei. God created the world in the way that He wanted. But we say, Hashto Ba'Golov is man koriv. We hope that soon in our lifetime, we should be able to see it being the world you want, because it's not the world you want right now, right? That's what's being said. It's a very powerful prayer as well. Why is Kaddish only said 11 months for parents? So the Rama already says this in Shulchan Aruch, and that's because the greatest amount of time that could be for the din, the judgment of a person, is 12 months. We don't want to assume that parents are being judged for 12 months. So we recess it till 11 months. In Sephardic tradition, by the way, you know what they do? They do 11 months, they do a week gap, and then they go back to it. In Ashkenazic tradition, they stop for the entire 11th month. Commemorations. Why is the day of the Yortzeit sometimes complicated to figure out? The reason is because the Yortzeit is always the day of death, the day of Petira, right? Sometimes, if there is a gap of more than 2 or 3 days between the death and burial, so this often happens if there's a weekend and a transportation to Israel, as an example, right? In those situations, there'll be a gap of 2 or 3 days. Then the first year goes back to the day of burial, not the day of death, only for the first year. In irregular burial, this is not the case. In the vast majority, I'd say 85% of cases where a person passes away and he's buried that day or the next day, this is not relevant. It's always the day of Petira. Now, people seem to have confused notions. No, it's only if there's a 2-day or 3-day gap. Some even say in a 2-day gap it's not the case. It's only a 3-day gap. What's the reason for that? The logic is very simple. Is the Avelos starts at the time of burial, right? Now, if the Avelos starts at the time of burial and there's a 3-day gap, work with me here for a second. Right, so the Avelos starts, therefore, 3 days from Petira. If the Yortzeit will be measured from the day in the first year of death, then what's going to happen is the Yortzeit will be before the end of the Avelos. Make sense? Right? Because the Avelos only started 3 days later than the Petira, than Yortzeit. So the Yortzeit will actually occur at 2 days before the end of the Avelos. Which means that what's going to probably happen in people's minds is they're going to do the Yortzeit Su'udah, and they're going to say, we're done. And off they go, and they're no longer in a state of Avelos. But they're clipped off 2 days because of the thinking the Yortzeit is analogous to the Avelos. It's not in this particular case. The first year is pushed out. That's only the case if it's a 2 or 3 day gap or beyond. In a 1-day gap, like it's the next day, doesn't make a difference because if it's in a 1-day gap, the Yortzeit will be on the last day of Avelos. Right? So then it's not an issue. Just understand the logic of this as well. The 2-day gap is a dispute. There's 2 opinions in the Shach. Generally speaking, we paskin, I would recommend paskining, that in a 2-day gap we treat it like a 3-day gap because of the same logic applies as well. Why do we do Yizkor? So people ask this. So there's a lot of reasons for this. In fact, Yizkor is actually talked about mainly on Yom Kippur. That's what the Shulchan Aruch talks about. That's what the Sardim do. The Sardim do not have Yizkor as we have it. But it's typically on Yom Kippur. That's the main time. And the main idea is because that's a time where it's a very fascinating way of reading the Gemara. The Gemara says, Sifrei Chaim, Sifrei Mesim, Psuchim Lefana, right? That the books of life and death are open in front of God. What does it mean, the books of life and death? So we think that it's whose name, God forbid, is going to be placed in one book, or Be'ezrat Hashem will place in the other book. But the Rav Soloveitchik always pointed out that there's a different way of reading the Gemara, which is that those who are alive and those who are not alive are being judged on Yom Kippur, right? The books of everybody is open on Yom Kippur. And the Sifrei Mesim is a much bigger book than the Sifrei Chaim. Right? There's a much longer list that's there. Which means if it's the time of judgment, we want to do everything we possibly can to help those who are no longer here. But they don't have the capacity to do things, right? Because they don't have a body, they're not in the context in which they're able to perform Torah mitzvah. So we do an extra amount to make sure that on such a day of judgment that we're going to do that, which is why, what do? We pledge tzedakah. We pledge to do more for them. It can also be pledging to do other things. You can pledge to learn Torah, and you can pledge to Gemilas Chassadim. You can do all kinds of pledges. Tzedakah is an easy one, ironically, because it's just, I'm going to do this, and after Yom Tov, you give tzedakah. That's what it's meant to be. Interestingly enough, in Ashkenazic tradition, it also emerged on the last day of Yom Tov. The last day of Yom Tov, one of the reasons is because what's the last pasuk on the second day laning in Chutz Haaretz? In Chutz Haaretz, what's the last pasuk? End of Parshas Re'eh. Ish kamat nas yadai kevirkas Hashem Elokecha. That each person gives a gift to the ability of their hand. That's a call to giving tzedakah, which would be the practice when a person would go up to the Beis Hamikdash. They go to the Beis Hamikdash and they would give tzedakah. So what happened was they pivoted there and said This is a time where at Yom Tov, when a neshama at the end of Yom Tov, the neshama is present more at the times of Yom Tov. It's a time of giving. Let's put the two together, right? Let's give for the neshama at such a time as well. There was also a public aspect of it. There was also a time when there was a lot of pogroms and crusades and the Xeris Tachbetat and so on, which emerged to this. And there's a public and private aspect of this. Initially, actually, in the Ashkenazic world, it started off as a national time of acknowledgement of those souls, and then it turned personal in a tweak. But really it was actually national more than, which is why it didn't emerge in the Sephardic world, right? Because they weren't suffering under crusades, pogroms, and massacres. Okay, the same way. Why is that some people do not do Yizkor the first year around? So the default position is that everybody should, who's unfortunately in this club, should stay in for Yizkor. Some people decide not to for the first year. Why is that? Because Yom Tov is a very happy time. And if in the first year where everything is very raw, that a person is staying in and saying Yizkor for somebody else, it's going to verster, it's going to upset their Yom Tov. The equanimity is going to be, the balance is going to be shifted. And so that's why some people have the practice not to do it. Ironically, some people feel even worse because they didn't do it, right? So what I suggest to people is that figure out what your family minhag was. Go back 2 generations and ask, what did your parents do when they first suffered loss? And if they stayed out, then stay out. But otherwise, if you don't know, then stay in and do the Yizkor. That's where it comes from. Why is the day of the Yortzeit so special? So the Yortzeit is a special time where the person again re-enters in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the possibility of elevating their standing on the neshama is specifically imminently possible as well. So there's a lot of practices. People light a candle on their behalf. They say Le'ilei Nishmas. People daven, for a man, they try to lead the davening if they're able to. One should try to say all the Kaddishim if one's able to. If there's a Kriyas Torah for a man, they should try to get an Aliyah. One should there's the opportunity to learn Torah for the deceased, learning Mishnayos for the letters of the names, trying to visit the grave, to give stock on the memory of the deceased, and ideally to have a meal or a tikkun, which would mean that more people are saying brachas as well. These are all different things. Whether to settle machlekes, God forbid if there's machlekes, but it's an opportunity when the neshama is, so to speak, being called in front of Hashem to a larger degree in this day. That's a time where we try to do as much as we can in their merit, where their portfolio, so to speak, which is us, remains continues to be advanced. One of the different practices as to when to do the matzeva. So in Israel, chik-chak, right? In Israel, in the Shiva, they're already planning the matzeva. It's really, really fast. And that's generally speaking the Sephardic tradition, try to get up by the Shloshim. In the Ashkenazi tradition, the practice is at around 12 months, right? And the reason for that is 2. One is this is sometimes mistranslated, it is the Nishtakach Neralev Elacha Yud Beis Chodesh. That does not mean anybody's getting forgotten. What it means is the immediacy, the acuteness of the pain is dala after 12 months, and that's at that point in time we put a monument to, so to speak, move forward at that point in time. In addition, it's also the last period of time where the din for neshama on neshamas is happening is at 12 months. And so we don't want to sort of laud and praise the person at a time when there's still din going on. So we put it towards the end. It's not always the case, and it's possible that the family can only make it, and it's in Israel or wherever it is, and everybody can make. It's all right to do it earlier, but generally speaking, it's done around 12 months in Ashkenazi tradition, unless otherwise. Why do we put up a tombstone? So it's interesting. There are 3 names for a tombstone, which all describe different aspects of it. The one is the word matzeva. Matzeva literally means a standing stone. Interestingly enough, Hashem says that in lifetime we are only allowed to make a mizbeach, not a matzeva. A mizbeach avonim is literally a pile of stones. For those who were with me by the mizbeach of Yehoshua on Har Eival, it's a pile of stones, right? It's because that's how they made mizbachot. Hashem says, don't make a matzeva. The pagan practice used to be where they would serve God on a very large standing stone, and they would prostrate themselves and do libations. Yaakov Avinu did this in Parshas Vayetze, right? Because it's before the Matan Torah. So why is it that the matzeva is not appropriate? Rav Moshe Feinstein makes the observation, is the matzeva literally means to stand still, right? In life, we don't have the opportunity of standing still and serving God based on past achievements, right? Hashem, look where I am. Look what I did. I had my moment in the light, and the rest of my life I'm going to enjoy the proceeds. Nope, doesn't work like that. In lifetime, we keep on building and building and taking pieces and putting it together to build structures higher and higher. We never stop. But Rav Moshe says, but after we pass away, then a matzeva is appropriate. A standing stone, look at the achievements. Look at the achievements of this person. That is an appropriate time, which is one that the name of matzeva. Another reason it's called etzion, which literally means a marker. For those of priestly blood in this room, the reason they have a tzion is because there's tumah which is surrounding the absence of the full neshama being there, and so it needs to be demarcated. In fact, the Gemara describes that in the month of Adar, based in Metzayin as akfaros, that would indicate where people are buried, so that people would not walk over and become impure and eaten in impure state and truma, and so it's not appropriate. That's a tzion. There's a third name, and that is the nefesh. In the Mishnah, they call it tombstone also a nefesh. A nefesh literally means the soul. Now, there's different parts of the soul. There's the nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechila. The lowest part of the soul is, so to speak, tethered in this particular place. Why is that people go to the cemetery on fast days? So the Maharil observes that the fast days are a time of trouble for the nation of Israel. And when one goes to a cemetery and one stands by a person who passed away, who was a holy Jew, that is called Admas Kodesh. The ground is holy where they are because of the fact that the body which carried such a holy person is buried there, and therefore it is a place where tefillah is more readily acceptable. Which leads us to the last thing, which is, and that is, why is it that some people speak to the niftar and others do not at the grave? Like when it comes to praying, right? Go to the oil, see what people are doing there. They're speaking directly to the Rebbe, right? But some people, if you speak to the German and Lithuanian Jews, they're like, that is Avodah Zarah, right? So we're not supposed to do that. So how does this work? So there's different traditions when it comes to in Judaism as to what's appropriate. You know, do we speak to agencies in general? This is a much bigger topic in general. Shalom Aleichem, Baruchuni L'Shalom. Can you ask angels for blessings? Hamalach HaGoel Oisi. Can you ask angels for blessings? Agencies. Can you ask the dead? Can you ask the deceased for agency as well? Is a matter of dispute. In the Hasidic texts, absolutely. They say, please be a Melitz Yosher. A Melitz Yosher means a Melitz is an advocate of justice, of uprightness on my behalf, right? So please act on my behalf. Whereas in the strictly, we'll call it, world of Nigle, those are Jews who only operate with the less of the hidden stuff of Judaism, or the external part of Judaism. We would say no, we're not supposed to. We pray to God. Happens to be that it's like a high Wi-Fi signal, right? Where a lot of holy people are buried, there's a lot of holiness. So my prayers are more readily accepted in a holy place, but I'm praying to God because He's the one who's in charge, not them, right? Whereas in the Hasidic world, you can actually speak to the person. Generally speaking, I came across interesting insight in Rav Simcha ben Cohen, who makes observation. He says that if one does visit a niftar in the graveyard in the first year, one should not ask them anything in the first year, certainly. Because at a time where they're going through a process of judgment, it's not appropriate to ask them for anything. To a Melitz Yosher, you daven for them. You can say Tehillim for them, but you don't ask them. After that, once they've gone through the first year, at that point in time, then you put out the matzeva and you go there. It's all right to speak to them, which is the balance between these different ideas. There are a lot of things that we didn't cover. But I think this is a really important thing. Yes, Rosemary.
What about people put a stone